Well, good morning to everybody. If you haven't already, go ahead and open up your Bibles to Isaiah chapter 28. Isaiah chapter 28. We'll get in that text in just a moment. Our task this morning is to get through chapter 28 and 29. So we got a lot of different material to cover. It's about 50 verses in total, a little over 50 verses, but I think we can handle it. All right. Well, before we go ahead and dive in, let's go ahead and go to God in prayer, please. Our Father, we thank you so much for this beautiful day that you've given us and this opportunity to come here this morning to open up your word and to study it. We ask that you'll bless this study, help us to take from it what you would have us to take, to know that we have a sure and tried and true cornerstone in you to put our faith, and that is the only place that we need to put it. Help us to appreciate that, to appreciate what it is that you've done for us, and that you are our great rescuer, and our faith needs to be solely put in you. We thank you for the redemption and the salvation that you provide. Help us to see it this morning. It's in your Son's name we pray. Amen. All right. So we're beginning a new section in Isaiah this morning. We just concluded this broader section which covered chapters 13 through 23 and then 24 through 27, which was really dealing with the nations at large. You talked about the oracles or the burdens that were being doled out against the nations, the judgments that were being levied out on all these different groups. And the main point of all that was what ultimately? Kind of got it up there, but yeah, that God is overall, God is completely in control of what's happening with these different nations, right? We talked about the Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Ethiopians, the Edomites. I mean, we talked about all these different groups of people that God has dominion over, and no matter what they might be doing to you, against you, or even for you in some cases, remember that the only thing that you need to be putting your faith in and your trust in is God. And this new section picks up, and we'll run through chapter 35, and it's almost like an addendum to that, what we've just studied, because the idea, the overarching theme, I think, is still the same, that trust only in God. Right? There's going to be the proclivity to want to lean on other nations for some type of deliverance or to try to work out your own salvation in one way or another, but ultimately we need to be, and these people need to be, putting their faith and their trust in God. This section, which there's the kind of immediate section, which will be chapters 28 through 32, which has these 6 woes that run through it. Your version might say woe, or it might say but it's this idea of a lament that Isaiah is doling out on the people. And a lament, is kind of like a eulogy, a funeral type setting. This is a sad thing that Isaiah is having to present against these people. And you can imagine, the emotion that he might have as he's talking through these various messages, and the tears that he would be talking through. He doesn't want to see these bad things happen to this group of people specifically. This is God's people that he's going to be addressing. But within each of these woes, there are these salvation oracles that kind of accompany each one. There's a lament and a salvation, a lament, a woe, and then a salvation. You'll see that and note those as we go through. But again, the overall theme is this trust in God. So in our class this morning, the idea is going to be the woe against, first off, Ephraim and Israel, and a lament against these blind leaders that are blindly leading a blind people. But the idea, trust in God, who we'll say is He's established a chief cornerstone. Anything else is going to fall short. And then our next class, we'll talk about the folly specifically of trusting in Egypt, because I think that's the hints that he's kind of getting into right now. This is time-wise going to be during the time period of Isaiah, likely as Sennacherib and Assyria are coming down to make war against Judah now, specifically after having already dealt with Samaria and Israel and Syria. And Hezekiah, we talked about this a couple of classes ago, but he's starting to entertain ideas of alliances with Babylon, and he's kind of got, maybe his counselors trying to push him to make some type of alliances with Egypt, right? If the fastest horse is Assyria, the second fastest horse is Egypt, so they're going to try to place their bets there. And we'll talk about that in more detail next class. And then in chapters 32 and 33, you'll see God being this righteous king, this kind of reversal, and the overall confidence that we can have in God and his victory over enemies. And then lastly, in 34 and 35, kind of a bookend to this entire section before we get into the narrative piece of Isaiah with Hezekiah specifically, the idea of ultimately trusting in God and this great transformation that God is bringing about in his salvation. So that'll be the idea, Lord willing, for the next couple of classes. But for today, like I said, our goal is to get through chapters 28 and 29, and just to kind of highlight some of these points overall, because there's specific instances that I want to ultimately kind of draw out as we go through our text. And for those of you who don't know me that well, I'm a sucker for a good like a good Southern idiom, like some type of a phrase that's kind of humorous, but it makes a point, at the same time. Like we used to work with Ken Marshall, and we kept a running list of all the crazy things that he would say, that were trying to make a point, like busy as a one-armed paper hanger, or this is going to be like herding cats, like those types of things. I like phrases or sayings like that. And this section, chapters 28, 29, is full of those types of things, these little pictures that will kind of draw out and try to make a point. So overall, though, the text starts off talking about the drunkenness of Ephraim, and Ephraim being a stand-in for Israel. Those prideful and arrogant people, which we've talked about several times throughout Isaiah, that's kind of been the main sins that he's condemning, at least to start off with. Now, they're going to be ultimately brought low. They're compared to this crown that is beautiful but fading, and God's crown is going to be ultimate and lasting. And then, kind of like Nathan does with David, and like Paul does when he's talking about the evil Gentiles, and then turns it on to the evil Jewish people. There's this point of let's condemn Israel together. We can all get behind the theology of they deserve the punishment that they're getting, but now I'm going to turn it back on you, Judah, and what you're doing. But then God has ultimately provided this salvation, this cornerstone in verses 16 and following, and then a parable of a farmer, which we'll talk about. And then in chapter 29, you'll have this impending judgment that's coming against the sacred city of Jerusalem, and how odd and unthinkable of a thing that actually is, that God is laying siege, God is making war against, God is raising up armies and siege towers against his city, right? The city of David, because that's an unthinkable and strange and foreign idea, as Isaiah will call it. He'll ultimately bring them low to the ground, to the dust, but that's the only place that someone can be raised up, right? When they humble themselves as low as they can get. So God will raise them back up and save his city in an instant. The idea being, pay attention, stop being willfully blind, turn your attention to God, because he's going to cause this ultimate reversal to come about, where he's going to set things right, bring the haughty low and bring the low high. So God has redeemed his people, and that'll be the kind of end of our passages this morning. All right, so let's dive into the text. Starts off there in 28:1. Woe to the crown of pride, to the drunkards of Ephraim, whose glorious beauty is a fading flower, which is at the head of the verdant valleys. To those who are overcome with wine, behold, the Lord has a mighty and strong one, like a tempest of hail and a destroying storm, like a flood of mighty waters overflowing. Who will bring them down to the earth with his hand? The crown of pride, the drunkards of Ephraim, will be trampled underfoot, and the glorious beauty is a fading flower, which is at the head of the verdant valley. Like the first fruit before the summer, which an observer sees, he eats it up while it is still in his hand. All right, so as we've seen before, Isaiah is talking to this audience that's in Judah, right? He was the prophet primarily to the people in Judah, but he's talking about what's happening during or with the people of Israel, of Samaria, and he calls them Ephraim here. Ephraim being kind of the stand-in for Israel throughout the book of Isaiah. And he starts talking about them, and he's like, look what's happening to your counterparts, right? They're getting theirs because of their drunkenness, their crown of pride, which he describes as this fading flower. So you kind of get this picture of like a some type of a floral wreath that would go on the head of a victor, but it's this empty piece. It's this fading flower that's ultimately going to come to nothing. The idea of drunkenness there is they're kind of just, he'll come back to this when he talks about the people of Judah, but they're just stumbling around and not really having any sense of direction or what's right or what's appropriate. They're just kind of living high, but it's making them drunk, staggering around without any real purpose. And this crown that they have, which is this beautiful crown, they're experiencing richness. They had kind of everything going for them, but they're going to be brought low because of their arrogance and their pride. That beautiful crown of theirs is going to be this fading flower that ultimately gets trampled underfoot by this strong one that God is going to cause to come into the land, and that, of course, is Assyria. And he says there at the end, verse 4, and this is the first of kind of these idioms that you'll see, but it says like they're going to be taken out like the first fruit in the summer, which observer sees, or you might say of like a pre-ripe fig. Some of your texts might say it's like this surprise sweet treat that somebody's just going to gobble up in one bite. Like my translation just might be like, if I walked into a room and there's a Reese's that's already out of its wrapper, right? I don't have to even fiddle with the little black brown wrapper. I'm just going to take it and gobble it whole. That's what's going to happen. Assyria is going to come in. Nothing's going to stop them because they're primed and ready for the picking. They're just going to be eaten up in one fell swoop. So again, he's talking about Israel here, but he's talking to Judah, and so he is saying, pay attention to this. That's the key theme that you're going to see come up in 28 and 29. Pay attention. Take note of what's happening and apply it to yourself. What's the state of your circumstances? All right, verse 5 says, in that day the Lord of hosts will be a crown of glory and a diadem of beauty to the remnant of his people, for a spirit of justice to him who sits in judgment, and for strength to those who turn back the battle at the gate. And so again, you kind of see this idea of reversal. He's given the condemnation of Israel and Ephraim, but now the opposite of that. And what was the crown of beauty that was fading and is going to be trampled underfoot, the contrast now is God himself actually being the crown of beauty for his people, this glorious diadem, this crown of glory directly for his people. You get the same idea in several passages in the New Testament, but I was thinking specifically of James in James chapter 1, when he talks about the rich and the arrogant and the prideful being like a flower that is withering, but the righteous, the ones that trust in God, the poor in spirit and heart, will be lifted up and given the crown of life, right? God knows the individuals who are living in a way correct to him, this remnant of his people. And you see this idea of remnant continually popping up. It's this idea of as Paul will use it in Romans, this idea of a true Israel within Israel, right? You've got Israel, the nation, Israel, the physical people, but then you've got the real remnant within that, the people that are clinging to God, unlike the rest of these who, as we'll say later here in Isaiah, they come after him with their lips, but their hearts are far from them, or far from him. So it's this floral crown, the worldly crown that passes away, but this crown of God, which is everlasting, of glory and of life. And he gives it to the spirit of the people who want to do what's right. They're the ones, as opposed to and you'll see this in the very next section, the drunkard leaders who are judging in just chaos and with no real sense of purpose. But the ones that sit in judgment in a righteous way, God gives the spirit of justice so that they can continue to do better in that sense. So the ones that realize that there's a breach of the gate that we need to stand in, and God will give them strength. Those who are actively trying to pursue God, actively trying to pursue what is right and good and noble, God gives them the strength. God gives them the spirit of strength, the spirit of justice to continue in that, to do good. But the same thing happens on the other spectrum as well. And Isaiah talks about that if you're going to go down the wrong path and in rebellion against God, God will give you the spirit of strength to do that too. He'll pour that out. He'll call it a spirit of slumber, a spirit of sleep. He'll call it in chapter 29 that kind of makes the whole situation worse. So, and I think that's kind of the idea that he's pulling out here in this first section, that whichever camp you're going to set yourself up in, God will allow you to do it. God will give you over to it. He'll either give you the spirit of justice and strength to continue in this regard, or the spirit of stubbornness and hardness if we go the other way. All right, verse 7. But they also, so now turning his attention to Judah, kind of the David or the Nathan to David moment where Judah, you are the man. They also have erred through wine, and through intoxicating drink are out of the way. The priest and the prophet have erred through intoxicating drink. They are swallowed up by wine. They are out of the way through intoxicating drink. They err in vision. They stumble in judgment. For all their tables are full of vomit and filth. No place is clean. Okay, so this is the spiritual leaders of God's people in God's city, in God's house, and that are acting this way, as opposed to those who just mentioned who judge in justice by the Spirit of God. You've got these prophets and priests, these leaders of the people who are constantly drunk. They're obviously not taking their responsibilities and their duties as leaders of the people, spiritual leaders of the people, seriously. If you recall back in Leviticus chapter 10, after the deaths of Nadab and Abihu at the establishment of the tabernacle, remember when they set the tabernacle up, and what did Nadab and Abihu do? Somebody remember? Yeah, the strange fire, and then what happened? No bueno, right? Yeah, the fire came down and consumed them. They were struck dead. But in Leviticus chapter 10, after that, God prescribes, hey, Aaron and your family, no strong drink, no wine when you're serving in this priestly manner. So the idea is probably they were serving, kind of under the influence there. They're not taking their job as a leader of the people seriously. So God said none of that when you're working or serving in this capacity. Because, and he says there in Leviticus 10, you don't do this so that you can properly distinguish between good and bad, between clean and unclean, between holy and common, and be able to properly teach God's law. But these people are doing the exact opposite. It says they're swallowed up by it. And their meeting places, like if you walked in to have a meeting with the prophets or the priests, you walked into their main conference room and you look at the table and there's just bottles and vomit and puke everywhere. That's who's leading you. You walk in to have a conference with them, to receive counsel from them about how to proceed as a nation, proceed in your own individual walk, and this is what you see. No place is clean. They're giving out bad decisions, bad advice, bad counsel, and leading the people in a bad direction. Then in verse 9. It's kind of like Isaiah is confronting these prophets and priests of the people, but when they hear Isaiah speak to them, they just respond with a mocking overtone. It's constant. You see it all the time. If nobody has a solid rebuttal to you, they always resort to mocking. That's it. If you're having a conversation with somebody and they don't have some legitimate argument or debate to have with you, it turns to base mocking. And so these priests and these prophets of the people, they look at Isaiah and they say, to whom will he teach knowledge? And whom will he make to understand the message? Those just weaned from milk? Those just drawn from the breast? For with him it's precept must be upon precept, precept upon precept, line upon line, line upon line, here a little, there a little. So, they're mocking him as Isaiah is coming and trying to teach them the right way. And they're saying, who's this guy that's coming in here with this garbage talk? Who does he know who he's talking to? Who we are as individuals and leaders of the people? Because he's just giving this little baby message, this idea of stop sinning and worship right. We're priests for God's sake. He's saying, stop coming at us with this type of baby talk. And I like the actual Hebrew transliteration that I've pasted there at the bottom. It's Saul, la Saul, Saul, la Saul, call, la call, call, la call, call, la call. The idea is blah, 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 blah. That's what they think Isaiah is coming to them with, is just this gibberish talk, that is utterly worthless. And God says in the very next section, if you want blah, 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 I will give you blah, 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 blah. So, very next verse 11. It says, for with stammering lips and another tongue, or a foreign language, he will speak to his people. God will speak to his people. To whom he said, this is the rest with which you may cause the weary to rest, and this is the refreshing, yet they would not hear. But the word of the Lord was to them, precept upon precept, precept upon precept, line upon line, line upon line, here a little, there a little, that they might go and fall backward and be broken and snared and caught. Therefore hear the word of the Lord, you scornful men who rule this people who are in Jerusalem, because you have said, we made a covenant with death, and with Sheol we are in agreement, and with overflowing scourge passes through, it will not come to us. For we have made lies our refuge, and under falsehood we have hidden ourselves. So he says there's going to be this different tongue that's going to say the same thing, this foreign tongue. And the idea is that these oppressors, these Assyrians are going to come in and they're going to take you. They're not going to speak your language. You're going to hear them talk to you. I mean, you just think if you don't know Spanish or French or Chinese or German, when you hear it, it doesn't mean anything to you because you don't know what they're saying. And God is saying, well, you're calling out Isaiah saying he's just telling you blah, 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 blah. Well, I'm going to bring in foreigners, and that's all you're going to hear from them is blah, 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 blah. But you're going to know what they're saying. You're going to know the message because they are going to be dominating you in this judgment setting. So if that's what you want, again, God's going to give it to you. If that's the direction you're going, God will definitely let you have it. Because he says you were supposed to live there in verse 12, you were supposed to live in this refreshing place, this land of rest, this land of peace. Jerusalem is supposed to be the city of peace, but you would not hear. You would not listen. And so this is coming upon you. This blah, 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 blah is coming your way. You're going to be falling backward because you won't hear it. You're going to be broken and snared and caught, and you'll get the message then. So verse 14, again, this is the point. Pay attention. Therefore, hear. Trying to get your attention here. I'm trying to get some point across to you so that it might be better for you. Because these people are trying to take it upon themselves, to save themselves, to get themselves out of this little pickle of a situation that they've got themselves in. Because when Assyria came against Israel and Syria, if you remember, Israel and Syria were trying to get Judah to join their little coalition against Assyria. But what did Judah do? Does anybody remember? They rejected him, but then actually kind of joined up with Assyria. They're like, we're going to bet on that strong horse. So they made this covenant with death. He calls it out. That they made this covenant, and so Isaiah actually kind of turns that mockery on them because how foolish of a situation that they themselves have gotten themselves into. They got in bed with Assyria, and now they're going to experience the downfall side of that, this covenant with death that they entered into. And even at the same time, currently, now that Assyria is coming against them, death is coming their way, they're trying to make separate agreements with Egypt. Egypt to the south to kind of be able to lean on them for refuge. And we'll talk about that a little bit more detail our next class. But whenever Sennacherib and the Rabshakeh and they come outside of the city of Jerusalem, they're encamped around it, and they're even calling out to them like, "You're depending on Egypt, but Egypt ain't coming." And so Isaiah is telling the people, well, these covenants and these agreements that you're trying to make to save yourselves aren't going to work. You're making a covenant with death. You're making this agreement with Sheol. Sheol just is the grave. It's not going to work out for you. Anything that you're trying to put your trust in outside of God is ultimately going to come up short because that's a covenant with death, an agreement with Sheol. They're saying, well, when the scourge, this overflow, this flood of Assyria comes in, it's not going to actually come to us because, again, you see the foolishness of this last statement in verse 15. We've made lies our refuge. Well, that doesn't make any sense. You're going to make up something and then depend on it. That's not gonna work for you. Under falsehood we've hidden ourselves. It's like playing hide and seek with a toddler. If they're it's fun as the adult, but the kids actually think they're really hiding. They just throw the blanket over themselves and they're sitting on the couch and then they're giggling and shaking the whole time. And of course, you as the adult know exactly what the situation is. You know exactly where they are, but that's the people's circumstance here. They're really under that blanket, thinking that they're hidden and that they're safe. And then God's saying, no, this is ludicrous. Everything you're trusting in is ultimately going to come to nothing. That's a good stopping point right there for a second. Does anybody have any comments or thoughts thus far?
Josh, it's been
Yeah, no, I find that to be very interesting, especially in this section, that no matter which way you're going, God's going to give it to you and give you the strength to follow it, whether that's down the wrong path or the right one. But he'll always have that hand out and the message out, and we'll talk about that when we get in verse 29 or chapter 29. Yeah, no, exactly. The freedom of choice is always there, but this is a plague that's been against humanity since the beginning. Adam and Eve saying, we can make ourselves out to be like God, or the Tower of Babel, like let's make a name for ourselves and assemble all men to this point. It's the same thing, trying to set up via pride and arrogance your own means of salvation, your own means of obtaining heaven, and that ain't going to work. Never has, never will. And Paul will use this section here even just in just a moment, but the next verse in verse 16, when he's talking about kind of the idea of pursuing salvation and pursuing God via works of the law as opposed to faith. He'll make that comparison in Romans chapter 9. But
isn't it interesting that Paul talks about this sending a strong delusion? You want to believe a lie? That's your choice. I'll send you a strong delusion.
Yep.
You can believe a lie. You can do it at half.
Yeah. God gave them over there to the unclean lust there in Romans 1. Yep. Nope, that's exactly right. Exactly right. All right, verse 16 says, Therefore, thus says the Lord God, Behold, I lay in Zion a stone for a foundation, a tried stone, a precious cornerstone, a sure foundation. Whoever believes will not act hastily or not be ashamed, as other translations might say. Also, I will make justice the measuring line and righteous the plummet. The hail will sweep away the refuge of lies, and the waters will overflow the hiding place. Your covenant with death will be annulled, and your arrangement with Sheol will not stand. When the overflowing scourge passes by, then you will be trampled down by it. As often as it goes out, it will take you, and by morning and morning it will pass over, and day and by night it will be a terror just to understand the report. For the bed is too short to be stretched out on, and the covering is so narrow that one cannot wrap himself in it. For the Lord will rise up as at Mount Perazim, and he will be as angry as at the valley of Gibeon, that he may do his work, his awesome work, and bring to pass his act, his unusual act. Now therefore, do not be mockers, lest your bonds be made strong. For I have heard from the Lord God of hosts a destruction determined even upon the whole earth. So, the idea of going after and trying to establish your own salvation via these own alliances, your own maneuvering, your own cunning, doesn't hold up, doesn't work. But what does work is the sure cornerstone that God has established. This tried and precious and sure foundation, the one that trusts in it will not act hastily. That's the quote that Paul uses in Romans chapter 9. And the whole point there was, the Gentiles who have, found salvation, they did it by faith, but the Jews who are being cast out and kept from it, it's because they're trying to pursue it by works. So trying to work it out yourself doesn't play with God. It's putting your hope and your trust in Him. So he continues to use these building analogies, this cornerstone analogy in verse 17, using the measuring line of the plummet. Let me check how you guys are doing here in Judah and Jerusalem by these measuring tools and using that building analogy. It's no good. And so this storm is coming upon you, and it's going to wash you away. And he kind of uses the same terminology that he just used in the previous section. This flood, the storm is coming. It's going to wipe away your refuge of lies. It's going to overflow your false hiding place. That covenant with death that you've made is going to be annulled. Your agreement with Sheol ain't gonna play out. It's gonna come at you all the time. Verse 19 is, it's gonna go out, overtake you morning and morning. It will pass over. You can imagine during the days of Sennacherib and Judah, Sennacherib himself recorded that he sacked 46 different cities on his way to ultimately kind of come up around Jerusalem. Imagine you're Hezekiah, you're the leaders of the people, and you hear the new report every morning. Another one down, another one down, another one down, and he's coming for you. And you look out and you see the smoke on the horizon, and you know what's heading your way. So you can understand the idea of just being a terror to understand the report, that you get this wave every day you get up, that this is coming towards you. But then there's another one of those idioms or the analogies, the bed's too short and the blanket's just not enough. The idea that you think you're finding rest, you think you're finding deliverance in Egypt. You look at this bed, it looks good, it looks solid, it looks comfortable, but then you lay on it and your feet hang off the end, right? And that's not restful. Or I remember one time I was staying at one of my grandparents, I don't remember, and forgot to give me a blanket or something, and I had to find like a towel in the bathroom, and I'm covered up in it, and that doesn't do you any good. I'm trying to sleep under a towel. That's not comfortable. It's not going to do the job. It's the idea of you see this nice couch on Craigslist, right? And you think $50, it's a steal of a deal, and so you call the owner up and you say, I'll take it, I'll buy it sight unseen, and then you get there, and this is what you bought for $50, right? It's no good. You thought you had something that was worthwhile, that was useful, and it turns out to be nothing. And you bet everything on it, and now you're ultimately in a bad way because God is causing, he says, this unusual act to come upon Judah and Jerusalem. And it's unusual in the sense that it's his own covenant people that he's bringing this against. It's the city that bears his name that this is coming against. It's definitely odd indeed. In verse 21, he says he's going to rise up like at Mount Perazim, and he'll be angry as in the valley of Gibeon. These are allusions to whenever David was going up and attacking the Philistines, or Joshua with the Gibeon, and that was where he cried out to God, give me a little bit more daylight so I can continue to beat these enemies back. Those are instances of people relying on God, David and Joshua relying on God, taking counsel with God about how to address this situation at hand, and God gives them all the strength they can have to make it happen. God gives them more so that they can continue to go in that direction. Theirs just happens to be the good one. And the idea there at the very end, God can do, will do, and has done incredible things so he can handle this situation. But don't make your stupid situation even stupider by making stupid decisions. That's the idea. And then he closes out that section with this brief parable about a farmer. And then for sake of time, we won't read the whole section. But the idea in verses 23 through the end of 29, the idea is that even a quote-unquote simple farmer can understand just the natural situation of things, right? That they don't plow all day long just for the sake of plowing. They plow to sow seed, right? And when they get the seed and they reap the harvest, they treat different harvests differently to get the desired result out of it, right? And that's what God is saying. Farmers can receive this instruction by God because they're just observant about what's happening, and they take note of it, do the right thing, and reap the good results. And God is saying to you, pay attention, because if you're not going to look at the natural order of things and how things work out when you go down this path, then you're going to be like a farmer who just plows away all day, keeps plowing and plowing and plowing and plowing, never planting seeds, and then they're surprised when there is no crop. Well, it's because you didn't do the rest of the job. And so that's what he's saying here in this analogy of the farmer. That, pay attention. Be like the farmer who pays attention and takes note of the natural order of things, does the right thing, and reaps the desired result. All right. Then in chapter 29, he says, this is the next woe in this section. Woe to Ariel, the city where David dwelt. Add year to year, let feasts come around, yet I will distress Ariel, and there shall be heaviness and sorrow, and it shall be to me as Ariel, or an altar hearth. I will encamp against you all around. I will lay siege against you with a mound, and I will raise siege works against you. You shall be brought down, you shall speak out of the ground, and your speech shall be low, out of the dust. Your voice shall be like that of a medium, out of the ground, and your speech shall whisper out of the dust. So the rebuttal of the Judean audience at this point might be, well, we're still worshiping Yahweh. We're still God's people. We're still the covenant people of God. We're still living in the city of Jerusalem, his precious and chosen city. But he's saying, woe to that city of David. And he uses the term Ariel here. And Ariel is, anytime you see, there's the L at the end of the word, E-L, that's Elohim, that's God. And the actual translation could either be Lion of God or altar of God, or altar hearth. And I think within the context, the one that makes the most sense is this altar of God. It was that precious city where all the sacrifices took place, where all the proper worship of God takes place. And he's saying, keep letting your years go by, doing all your little vain feasts and coming, like we talked about in chapter 1, coming and participating in this vain and useless worship. You just keep on doing it, and then I'm going to turn you into an altar hearth. I will make you as this altar. And that means that you're going to be the sacrifice that's ultimately going to be offered upon it if you continue in it and you continue in this path. Because in verse 3 and 4, I'm going to camp against you. And I'd highlighted here that I will encamp, I will lay siege, I will raise. It is God that is doing this via the Assyrians, that he's bringing this on his special people who think they're, just by nature of who they are, that they're going to be exempt from it, or where they are, they're going to be exempt from it. And that's not the case. But he says that he's going to bring them down. He will take them to the ground, to the dust, to the ground, to the lowest point, right? But it's this destruction that he's bringing on the people. The end game isn't utter and complete devastation of Judah, right? It is ultimately a scourging or a chastisement to bring them low, to humble them as low as he can get them, so that he can ultimately rise them back up. And that's where we pick up in the very next verse. In verse 5, it says, "Moreover, the multitude of your foes shall be like fine dust, and the multitude of the terrible ones like chaff shall pass away." So it's just instantly you see this immediate reversal of the people being under siege directly by God, but then God in the very next verse says, I'm going to take it away. And the multitude of them, how many there are, like dust or like chaff, they're going to become like chaff and just blown away in an instant. It shall be in an instant suddenly, there's the end of verse 5. Verse 6, "And you will be punished by the Lord of hosts," again, now talking to the enemies, "with thunder and earthquake and great noise, with storm and tempest and the flame of devouring fire. The multitude of all the nations who fight against Ariel, even all who fight against her and her fortress and distress her, it shall be as a dream of a night vision. It shall be as when a hungry man dreams, and he looks and he eats, but he awakens and his soul is empty. Or as when a thirsty man dreams, and look, he drinks, but he awakes, and indeed he's still faint, and his soul still craves. So the multitude of all the nations shall be who fight against Mount Zion." So this is an allusion to this judgment that's coming via Assyria, via Sennacherib, that flood that overflows the Euphrates, takes over Israel and Samaria, and makes its way to the neck of Jerusalem, or neck of Judah, which is Jerusalem. And what happens when Sennacherib encamps around Jerusalem and lays siege against it? Does it work out for him? He's got the superior army, he's got the force, he's got the cunning words to talk him down, but what happens? What does God do? Yeah, in their sleep. 185,000. He sends the Spirit of the Lord in their camp, and they wake up, and 185,000 of them are dead. And you can imagine this is the group where, to use Sennacherib's own words, he had them locked up in a cage. We've got a big meal tomorrow, right? It's just there right for the taking. But they wake up from their slumber. 185,000 of them are dead and laying in the ground. Right, those Assyrians were thinking, we've got a big meal tomorrow, and they eat during their dreams, and they wake up, and then what in the world happened? Looking around, and everything's just falling apart. And so Sennacherib and his army, or what's left of them, end up running back home with the tail between their legs, and he's eventually killed by his two children when he gets there. It happens so fast, Isaiah says, that it won't even seem real. It'll just seem like a dream. But again, the point being, this is ultimately the fate of any that set themselves up against God. So the point for the people who are paying attention, is that God is going to fight for them. God will be their refuge. God will be their strength if they will put their hope and their trust in him. So, pause and wonder. The very next verse, verse 9, pay attention. Just take stock of what's actually happening here. Because if you blind yourselves, you're going to be blind. And he talks about the people that are being drunk, but now not with wine. They stagger, but not with intoxicating drink. For the Lord has poured out on you the spirit of deep sleep, and he's closed your eyes, namely the prophets, and he's covered your heads, namely the seers. So the idea being here that when you go down this path, God's going to give you more of that. If you're going to blind yourselves, you're going to be blind. Pretty obvious statement, right? And now it's like you're drunk, but not with intoxicating drink. You've distorted your view of reality. You've distorted your view of God that you can't even see which way's right in association with them. And that's because now God is making it even harder on you via this judgment. God is giving you more of what you sought out to seek. He's poured on you the spirit of deep sleep, and he's closed the eyes of the prophets and of the seers there. So though, they're not receiving the message that they need to receive, ultimately because, and this is of 11 and 12, they're not looking out for it. They're not seeking it out properly. I like this. This is another one of those idioms here, but in verse 11, it says, the whole vision has become to you like the words of a book that is sealed, which men deliver to one who is literate and saying, read this, please. And he says, I cannot, for it is sealed. And then the book is delivered to one who is illiterate saying, would you read this, please? And he says, I can't because I'm illiterate. I think the point of this is that people make a lot of these particular two verses talking about God sealing up the message, or kind of allusions to Revelation 5 and the sealing up of the message. But I think the message here is a lot simpler. That if you take the message a sealed message to someone and saying, read this, please, and their excuse is, I can't because it's sealed, that's a stupid excuse. I get mail all the time that's sealed up. You know how if I want to get in, you know how I do it? I break the seal. It's a pretty easy thing to break. If I want the message, I can get the message. And so it even says, okay, well, you take it to somebody who is illiterate. They can't read. My kids, or one of my kids, can't read. You know what he does if he wants to know what something says on a piece of paper? Does he just, I can't read, I'm lost. What's he do? He asks somebody. He takes it to me. He says, would you read this to me? Explain to me what it's saying. It's ironic that when we get the Ethiopian treasure in Acts, what's he reading? Isaiah. And what's his statement when he's reading it? How can I understand unless someone explains it to me? Right? The message is there. Even for these people that are constantly trying to rebel and get away from God, the message is still obtainable if they will seek after it, if they will go after it. These are stupid and lazy excuses to a people that has already set their hearts to rebel against God. A couple minutes left here. Verse 13, therefore, the Lord has said, inasmuch as these people draw near me with their hearts and honor me with their lips, but they have removed their hearts far from me, and their fear toward me is taught by the commandment of men. Therefore, behold, I will again do a marvelous work among this people, a marvelous work and a wonder, for the wisdom of their wise men shall perish, and the understanding of the prudent men shall be hidden. Woe to those, and there's the third woe, woe to those who seek deep to hide their counsel far from the Lord, and their works in the dark, and they say, who sees us and who knows us? Surely you have things turned around. Shall the potter be esteemed as the clay? For shall the thing made say of him who made it, he did not make me? Or shall the thing formed say to him who formed it, he has no understanding? All right, so again, more kind of silly statements that are ultimately being drawn out here. But he starts off there with this damning phrase where he says, they draw near to me with their mouths and they honor me with their mouths, but their hearts are far from me. All right, so this is a people that is still religious in some sense. They're still got their feast that they're going back. They're still going up the holy city. They still think we're in Ariel, where we're supposed to be. We're doing what we're supposed to do, but their hearts are far from it. And Jesus makes use of this passage in Matthew chapter 15 whenever the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, they come to Jesus, and their complaint is, why do your disciples not wash their hands before they eat? And Jesus just lays into them. He's like, you know what? I know a passage in Isaiah that says exactly what you're talking about. You're honoring me with these commandments of men that you're establishing it. Because it wasn't even a commandment as such. It was this tradition of the elders that had been set up. And they're saying, why don't your apostles, why don't your followers do this? And Jesus says, well, why don't you take care of your parents? Let's talk about the law talks about taking care of your parents. And yours are out in the cold because you're setting up these false ways of religious to check the box that you're doing what's right, you're doing what's okay, but your heart is ultimately far, far from God. And the same situation is happening here with Isaiah and these people. They're just checking the box, going through the motions, tricking themselves into thinking everything's okay, but ultimately their state is a bad one. And so Isaiah, again, with this final woe of this particular section this morning, woe to these who try to find other ways around God, who are seeking counsel in dark places. These are the ones who are probably trying to look like they're following God and doing what God says and trusting in God, but they're the ones calling Egypt on the phone in the back room saying, you got our money, right? You're still gonna come and help us when Assyria starts to come our way. Because they're saying, who's seen us? Who knows what's happening? But again, the foolishness of that statement, he closes that out saying, you are the created, God is the creator. Put yourself in the proper perspective, take stock of your situation and know what's really going on. Then verses 17 through the end of the chapter, though, is this great reversal that is coming. God is ultimately going to set things right. Lebanon, which has been cut down and laid low, is going to be turned into this fruitful forest. The humble are going to be brought up, and the arrogant and the prideful are going to be brought low. And God is going to correct everything. He'll ultimately redeem his people, redeem the seed of Abraham, which we get to be the benefactors of. So that's chapters 28 and 29, and Lord willing, we'll pick up with 30 and 31 on Wednesday. Thank you.